The ship called Remembrance drifted through the cold darkness at the edge of known space. It was massive. Its hull stretched for kilometers, covered in sensor arrays and communication dishes that pointed toward every corner of the galaxy. This was not a warship. It was something far more important. It was a vault, a keeper of memories, a guardian of truths that most species preferred to forget. Ambassador? Kethra stood at the viewing port of her small transport vessel and watched the human ship grow larger. Her scales shifted from deep green to pale yellow. This was a sign of nervousness among her people, the Sithani. She could not control it. She had been traveling for 3 standard years to reach this place, and now that she was here, she felt afraid. The Sithani were a young species. They had only been traveling among the stars for 500 years. In galactic terms, they were children. They had much to learn about the universe and the beings that lived in it. That was why her government had sent her on this mission. They needed answers, specifically. They needed answers about humans. Kethra had grown up hearing stories about the human species. Every young civilization heard these stories eventually. They spread through trading posts and diplomatic stations, like a slow disease. Merchants whispered them to each other over drinks. Soldiers shared them in quiet moments before battle. Even the eldest species in the galaxy, beings who had watched stars be born and die, spoke of humans with something strange in their voices. It was not hatred. It was not anger. It was fear. The Sithani government was facing a difficult choice. A coalition of species had approached them with an offer of alliance. This coalition believed that human expansion was a threat to the galaxy. They wanted the Sithani to join them in opposing this expansion. The offer was tempting. The coalition was powerful, but before making any decision, the Sithani needed to understand something first. They needed to understand why everyone was so afraid of humans. Kethra's transport docked with the Remembrance, and she walked through the airlock into a long corridor. The walls were lined with display cases containing artifacts from 1,000 different worlds. She recognized some of them. Others were completely alien to her. Each one was labeled with careful precision, describing what it was and where it came from. A human was waiting for her at the end of the corridor. He was tall and thin, with skin that had turned pale from years of living in artificial light. His hair was white, and his face was covered in deep lines. But his eyes were what caught her attention. They were old. Not just old in the way that faces become old. They were old in a way that suggested they had seen things that most beings could not imagine. "Ambassador Kethra," the man said. His voice was soft but clear. "I am Archivist Solomon Vance. Welcome to the Remembrance." Kethra performed the traditional Sithani greeting, pressing her clawed hands together and bowing her head. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Archivist. I know your time is valuable." Vance smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "My time is the one thing I have plenty of, Ambassador. I am 1,200 years old. The humans who built this ship are long dead. Their children are dead. Their grandchildren are dead. I remain because someone must remember." Kethra's scales shifted again. No Sithani had ever lived past 300. The idea of existing for over a millennium was both fascinating and terrifying. "You are here because your government wants to know about humans," Vance continued. He began walking down another corridor, and Kethra followed. "More specifically, you want to know if the stories are true. You want to know what we are capable of? You want to know if you should be afraid," as Kethra admitted. "There was no point in lying. My people are being asked to join a coalition against your species. Before we make that choice, we need to understand the truth." Vance stopped walking. He turned to face her, and his ancient eyes studied her for a long moment. "The truth. That is a heavy thing, Ambassador. Are you certain you want to carry it?" "I must." The archivist nodded slowly. "Then I will show you something that very few beings have ever seen. I will show you what happened to the last species that challenged humanity. And when you have seen it, you will understand why no one has challenged us since." They walked deeper into the ship. The corridors became narrower. The lighting became dimmer. They passed through sections that contained memorials to human wars. Kethra saw images of battles fought on dozens of worlds. She saw lists of names carved into metal walls. She saw weapons preserved behind glass, each one tagged with information about where it had been used and how many lives it had taken. Humans had fought many wars. That much was clear. They had fought each other. They had fought other species. They had fought for territory, for resources, for survival, for reasons that made no sense to anyone but themselves. Fighting seemed to be woven into their nature. Finally, they reached a sealed door. It was different from the others. It was thicker, heavier, covered in warning symbols that Kethra did not recognize. Vance pressed his hand against a scanner. A light passed over his palm, reading his genetic signature. Then he leaned close to a small microphone and spoke a phrase in a human language that Kethra did not understand. Finally, he entered a long sequence of numbers into a keypad. The door opened with a sound like a sigh. Beyond it was a small room. The walls were bare. The floor was empty except for a single pedestal in the center. On the pedestal sat two things. The first was a holographic projector, currently inactive. The second was a piece of metal about the size of Kethra's hand. It was charred and twisted, and strange symbols were carved into its surface. "This is the vault of the silencing," Vaughn said quietly. He walked to the pedestal and stood beside it. "This room contains everything that remains of the Vexari Dominion." Kethra felt her hearts begin to beat faster. The Vexari. She had heard that name before, but only in fragments. Only in whispers so quiet that she could never be sure she had heard them at all. Who were the Vexari? She asked. Vance touched the holographic projector. It hummed to life, and suddenly the room was filled with light. Images appeared in the air around them. Images of creatures unlike anything Kethra had ever seen. They were tall. Taller than humans? Taller than Sithani? Their bodies were covered in hard black shells that gleamed like polished stone. Their heads were dominated by massive compound eyes that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their limbs ended in sharp points that looked capable of cutting through metal. The Vexari Dominion, Vance said, was one of the most powerful empires in galactic history. They controlled 400 star systems. They had subjugated 19 species. Their military was vast, their technology was advanced, and their cruelty was legendary. They believed that strength was the only thing that mattered. They believed that the strong had the right to rule the weak. And when they encountered humanity, they believed we would be easy to conquer. The images shifted. Now they showed Vexari ships. Massive vessels bristling with weapons. Fleets that stretched across entire solar systems. They were wrong, Vance continued. His voice had grown harder, colder. They made the mistake of thinking that humans were like the other species they had conquered. They made the mistake of believing that we could be broken. They made the mistake of pushing us too far. He looked at Kethra. And in his ancient eyes, she saw something that made her scales turn completely white. What you were about to learn? Ambassador is what happens when humanity decides that a species no longer deserves to exist. The Vexari numbered in the trillions. They had ruled their empire for 10,000 years. And we erased them so completely that this piece of metal is one of the only proofs they ever existed at all. Kethra stared at the charred fragment on the pedestal. Her mouth had gone dry. Her hearts were pounding. Why? She whispered. What did they do? Vance's expression did not change. Sit down, Ambassador. This is a long story. And by the time it is finished, you will understand exactly why your coalition should reconsider their plans. And the story of the Vexari Dominion began. The hologram filled the room with images of the past. Archivist Vance stood beside the display, his ancient face lit by the soft blue glow. Ambassador Kethra sat on a small bench that had folded out from the wall. Her scales had not returned to their normal color. They remained pale, almost white, as she watched the story unfold. 800 years ago, Vance began, the Vexari Dominion was at the height of its power. They had been building their empire for 10,000 years. They had conquered system after system, species after species. Nothing had ever stopped them. Nothing had ever even slowed them down. The hologram showed a map of the galaxy. A large section was colored in deep red. This was Vexari space. It covered 400 star systems. Billions upon billions of beings lived under their rule. The Vexari had a simple belief, Vance continued. They believed that the universe belonged to the strong. They believed that weak species existed only to serve the strong. This was not just a political idea to them. It was their religion. It was the foundation of everything they did. New images appeared. Kethra saw species she did not recognize. Small creatures with soft bodies. Tall beings with multiple limbs. Furry mammals with gentle eyes. All of them wore collars around their necks. All of them worked in mines, in factories, in fields. Their bodies were thin. Their movements were slow. They were slaves. The Dominion had subjugated 19 species before they found humanity, Vance said. Some they used as workers. Some they used as soldiers. Some they used as food. Kethra felt sick. Her people had never practiced slavery. The idea of using intelligent beings as food was beyond horrifying. When the Vexari discovered human space, they saw exactly what they expected to see. A young species. A small territory. Limited military power? They believed we would be easy to add to their collection. The hologram changed again. Now it showed a planet. It was a beautiful world, covered in green forests and blue oceans. Cities dotted its surface, connected by transportation networks that glowed in the night. This was New Helsinki, Vance said. A colony world at the edge of human space. Population, 43,000. It was a peaceful place. Farmers, scientists, teachers, families. They had never seen war. They had never needed to. Shadow fell across the planet. Ships appeared in orbit. Massive vessels covered in black armor. The Vexari fleet had arrived. The Dominion sent their standard message. They told the colonists to surrender. They told them to give up their weapons, their ships, their freedom. They told them to prepare for integration into the Dominion as a servitor class. They gave them 1 day to respond. Kethra leaned forward. What did the humans do? Vance smiled, but it was not a happy smile. They sent back a single word. One word that changed the course of galactic history. The hologram displayed the transmission. A simple text message, broadcast on all frequencies. One word in the human language? No. The Vexari were amused, Vance said. They had heard defiance before. Every species resisted at first. It never lasted. They assumed humans would be the same. The hologram showed the invasion. Vexari dropships descended through the atmosphere like black rain. Soldiers poured out of them by the thousands. They were massive creatures, their exoskeletons gleaming, their weapons ready. They expected the colonists to run. They expected quick surrender. They were wrong. The people of New Helsinki had no military training. They had no heavy weapons. They had nothing but farming tools, mining equipment, and a stubborn refusal to submit. And somehow, they held the Vexari back for 3 months. The images showed the fighting. Humans hiding in forests, striking at Vexari patrols, and disappearing before reinforcements could arrive. Humans using tunnels and caves to move unseen. Humans building weapons from spare parts and broken machines. Humans refusing to give up even when they were outnumbered 100 to 1. They had conquered species with much larger armies and better technology. But these humans would not stop fighting. They would not surrender. They would not break. The hologram showed the final days of the siege. The surviving colonists had retreated to a bunker complex beneath the capital city. There were only 8,000 of them left, They were surrounded by an army of Vexari soldiers. When the Dominion forces finally breached the bunker, they expected to find terrified survivors begging for mercy. Instead, they found something else. The image showed a human woman standing in a control room. She was covered in dirt and blood. Her clothes were torn. Her face was exhausted. But her eyes were steady. In her hand, she held a device connected to the colony's fusion reactor. Her name was Alina Korhanen. She was a power plant engineer. When the Vexari broke through the last door, she looked at them and spoke in a language they could understand. The hologram displayed her words. "You wanted this planet? You can have it." She triggered the reactor overload. The explosion killed everyone in the bunker. It also killed 80,000 Vexari soldiers who had gathered around the complex. In a single moment, humanity showed the Dominion something they had never seen before. They showed them that humans would rather die than submit. Kethra's hearts were pounding. She had never heard of any species doing such a thing. The Sithani valued survival above all else. The idea of choosing death over surrender was alien to her. The High Sovereign of the Vexari was furious, Vance continued. He had lost more soldiers in one battle than in the previous century of conquests. But more than that, he was confused. He could not understand why these weak creatures had fought so hard. He could not understand why they had refused to accept their natural place as servants. The hologram shifted to show the Vexari leader. He was larger than the others, his exoskeleton covered in gold decorations that marked his rank. His compound eyes stared out at the viewer with cold intelligence. High Sovereign Vrexolan decided that humans needed to be taught a lesson. He authorized what the Dominion called the Doctrine of Submission. It was a terror campaign designed to break humanity's will to resist. Over the next 2 years, Vexari forces struck 12 more human colony worlds. The images that followed were difficult to watch. Kethra saw cities burning. She saw humans being dragged from their homes. She saw public executions broadcast across all frequencies. She saw children taken from their parents, their faces blank, as Vexari surgeons implanted controlled devices in their brains. They did not simply conquer these worlds, Vance said. His voice had grown cold. They made examples of them. They wanted every human to see what happened to those who resisted. They believed that enough pain, enough fear, enough death would eventually make us submit like every other species had. The hologram showed the reaction across human space. People watching the broadcast with horror on their faces. Families weeping for lost loved ones. Leaders meeting in emergency sessions arguing about what to do. Some humans wanted to negotiate. They thought that if we gave the Dominion what they wanted, the killing would stop. Others wanted to surrender completely. They believed that slavery was better than extinction. Vance paused. He looked at Kethra with those ancient eyes. But most humans felt something different. They did not feel fear. They did not feel despair. They felt rage. A cold, burning rage that spread through our species like fire through dry grass. The Vexari thought their terror campaign would break us. Instead, it united us in a way that nothing else ever had. The hologram showed a great chamber filled with human leaders. Representatives from every nation, every colony, every faction. They had spent centuries fighting each other. Now they sat together, their differences forgotten, their attention focused on a single speaker. She was a woman in a military uniform. Her hair was gray, her face was lined, and her eyes held the steady calm of someone who had seen too many battles to be frightened by one more. Her name was Yuki Tanaka. She was the fleet admiral of the United Earth Defense Force. The Dominion gave us an ultimatum, Vance said. Unconditional surrender, or they would come to Earth itself and reduce humanity to a servitor species. Our leaders debated for 3 days, and then Admiral Tanaka stood before them and spoke 6 words that changed everything. The hologram displayed her image, her mouth moving as she spoke. The words appeared beside her face, translated into a dozen languages. Then let them come for us. In that moment, Vance said quietly, the Vexari sealed their own fate. They had wanted to teach humanity a lesson about power. Instead, they taught us a lesson about ourselves. They showed us what we could become when we stopped fighting each other and started fighting together. The hologram faded. The room grew dark. What happened next? Kethra asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Vance looked at her. In the dim light, his face seemed older than time itself. What happened next was war, Ambassador. Not the kind of war the Dominion was used to. Not conquest or subjugation. This was something they had never faced before. This was humanity with nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. He touched the control panel, and new images began to form. And that is when the Vexari learned what it truly meant to challenge our species. The hologram came to life again, filling the small vault with images of war. Ambassador Kethra watched in silence. Her scales had turned a deep shade of gray, a color that among her people meant shock and disbelief. Archivist Vance stood beside the display, his ancient voice steady as he continued the story. The Vexari expected humanity to fall apart, he said. Every other species had. When faced with the doctrine of submission, civilizations always crumbled from within. Leaders would turn against each other. Populations would demand surrender. Fear would do the work that armies could not. The Dominion had perfected this strategy over thousands of years. The hologram showed the aftermath of the terror campaign. 12 human colonies lay in ruins. Millions of people were dead. The survivors lived in fear, waiting for the next attack. But something strange happened, Vance continued. Something the Vexari had never seen before. Instead of breaking apart, humanity came together. Old enemies put aside their hatred. Rival nations joined hands. Corporations that had spent decades fighting each other now shared resources freely. Religious groups that had disagreed for centuries found common ground. The images showed this transformation. Soldiers from different countries training side by side. Scientists from competing research facilities working together. Factories that once made consumer goods, now producing weapons of war. Ships being built in orbital. Stations around every human world. For the first time in our long and violent history, humanity became one people. We had always been divided by borders, by beliefs, by the color of our skin, and the languages we spoke. The Vexari erased those divisions in a way that no human leader ever could. They gave us something we had never had before. A common enemy. Kethra understood this concept. Her own people had unified in similar ways during times of crisis. But the scale of what she was seeing was beyond anything the Sithani had ever experienced. Admiral Yuki Tanaka was given command of the newly formed United Human Defense Force, Vance said. She was also given something that no military leader in human history had ever received: complete authority. Every ship, every soldier, every weapon in human space was placed under her control. There were no politicians second-guessing her decisions. There were no committees slowing down her plans. The people of Earth trusted her to save them, and they gave her everything she needed to do it. The hologram showed Admiral Tanaka in a command center. Screens surrounded her, displaying information from across human space. Officers moved around her, carrying reports and receiving orders. Her face was calm, but her eyes burned with a cold fire that Kethra found unsettling. Her first act was to create the doctrine of response. This was not a defensive strategy. This was not a plan to hold territory or protect borders. This was something far more simple and far more terrifying.
Vance paused.
He looked at Kethra to make sure she was paying attention. The doctrine of response had one rule. Any attack on human civilians would be answered with disproportionate retaliation. Not equal retaliation, disproportionate. If the Vexari killed 1,000 humans, we would kill 10,000 Vexari. If they burned one of our cities, we would burn 10 of theirs. We would make them pay such a heavy price for every drop of human blood that even their vast empire could not afford it. The images changed. Now they showed human fleets moving through space. These were not the scattered, poorly equipped ships of before. These were purpose-built warships, their hulls covered in weapons, their engines pushing them faster than anything the Dominion had ever faced. The Vexari had a forward operating base at a place called Kirith Minor. It was a space station where they gathered intelligence, planned attacks, and coordinated their terror campaign against us. They believed it was safe. It was deep inside their territory, protected by patrol fleets and sensor networks. The hologram showed the station. It was massive, a spinning structure of metal and glass that housed 50,000 Vexari soldiers and support staff. Admiral Tanaka's forces hit it without warning. But they did not simply destroy it. First, they captured it. Human soldiers boarded the station and fought through its corridors for 3 days. They took control of the central computer systems and downloaded everything. Every military plan, every communication code, every secret the Dominion had been keeping. Kethras's eyes widened. Boarding a defended station was incredibly dangerous. The losses must have been enormous. "You lost 4,000 soldiers in that battle," Vance said, as if reading her thoughts. "The Vexari lost all 50,000. When our forces withdrew, they left behind automated systems that detonated the station's reactor. Nothing survived." The explosion filled the hologram with white light, but that was just the beginning. Using the intelligence we had captured, Admiral Tanaka launched what became known as the Mirror Strikes. For every human colony the Dominion had attacked, we struck a Vexari population center. Not military targets. Colonies, food production worlds, industrial centers. The images that followed were difficult to watch. Vexari cities burning, civilians fleeing in terror, ships crashing down from the sky. The same horror that the Dominion had inflicted on humanity was now being inflicted on them. "The galaxy was shocked," Vance said. "Many species condemned us. They said we had become no better than the Vexari themselves. They said we were committing atrocities." He looked at Kethra. His expression did not change. They were right. We knew exactly what we were doing. We had made a choice. We decided that we would rather be monsters than be slaves. We decided that the Vexari would pay for every human life they had taken, even if it meant becoming something we once would have despised. Kethra wanted to say something. She wanted to express her horror at what she was hearing, but she could not find the words. What could she say to a species that had chosen this path? What could anyone say? Admiral Tanaka understood something that the Vexari did not. Vance continued. The Dominion was not truly unified. It was held together by force. The 19 species they had subjugated did not love their masters. They hated them. They feared them. And given the chance, they would rise against them. The hologram showed shadowy figures meeting in secret places. Humans in disguise, making contact with members of the subjugated species. Weapons being smuggled into Dominion territory. Training materials being distributed through hidden networks sent agents deep into Vexari space. They made contact with resistance movements that had been waiting for centuries for someone to help them. We gave them weapons. We gave them tactical training. We gave them communication devices that could not be traced. And we gave them a message. The hologram displayed the message. Simple words translated into a dozen alien languages. When we come, rise up. We will not abandon you. The Dominion had always relied on the obedience of their conquered peoples. They had never imagined that anyone would try to turn those peoples against them. They had never imagined that their slaves might become their enemies. Vance allowed himself a small smile. Within a year, the Vexari were facing something they had never experienced. Their supply lines were being sabotaged. Their communications were being intercepted. Their soldiers were being attacked by the very species they had enslaved. And through it all, human fleets continued to strike deeper and deeper into their territory. The hologram showed High Sovereign Vrexolin in his throne room. The massive Vexari leader was surrounded by advisors, all of them speaking at once. For the first time, his compound eyes showed something other than cold confidence. They showed fear. The High Sovereign was desperate. His empire was starting to crack. His generals were telling him that they could not fight on so many fronts at once. His people were beginning to question whether the war against humanity was worth the cost. Vance's expression grew dark. So Vrexolin made a decision. If conventional warfare could not destroy humanity, he would use something else. Something that no species had ever survived. He ordered his scientists to prepare the Dominion's ultimate weapon. The hologram showed a laboratory deep inside a Vexari research station. Scientists in protective suits worked with vials of dark liquid, Warning symbols covered every surface. They called it the extinction strain. It was a biological weapon designed specifically to target human neural tissue. Once released, it would spread through our population like fire through dry wood. There was no cure. There was no treatment. Within 18 months of deployment, every human in the galaxy would be dead. Kethra's heart froze. Biological weapons were forbidden by every treaty in the galaxy. Using them was considered the ultimate crime against civilization. The High Sovereign did not care about treaties, Vance said. He did not care about galactic law. He cared only about winning. And if winning meant erasing humanity from existence, he was prepared to do it. The hologram showed stealth drones being loaded onto ships. Small, fast, nearly invisible to sensors. Each one carried enough of the extinction strain to infect an entire planet. They launched their attack on Earth itself, our homeworld, the cradle of our species, the place where humanity had taken its first steps under an ancient sun. Vance's voice dropped to almost a whisper, and for a brief moment it seemed like the Vexari had won. The extinction strain spread faster than anyone had predicted. Within weeks, 4 billion people were infected. Our children were dying in their beds. Our elders were collapsing in the streets. The Dominion broadcasts images of our suffering across the galaxy, celebrating their triumph. He looked at Kethra with those ancient eyes. But they made a mistake, Ambassador. They thought that killing us would be enough to defeat us. They did not understand that humanity is most dangerous when we have nothing left to lose. They had taken everything from us. Our homes, our families, our future. All we had left was our rage and our determination to make them pay. The hologram faded. What happened next would change the galaxy forever, and the Vexari would learn, too late, that they should have simply let us alone. The vault was silent except for the soft hum of the holographic projector. Ambassador Kethra sat completely still, her scales now a shade of black that meant profound dread among her people. Archivist Vance stood in the blue light, his face showing no emotion as he continued the terrible story. The extinction strain worked exactly as the Vexari had designed it, he said. It entered the human body through the air. Once inside, it attached itself to our brain cells. The first symptom was a headache. Then came confusion. Then seizures. Then death. There was nothing our doctors could do. Every treatment they tried failed. Every cure they developed came too late. The hologram showed hospitals overflowing with patients. Medical staff worked without rest, their faces exhausted and hopeless. Bodies were stacked in corridors because there was no more room in the morgues. Outside, the streets were empty. People stayed in their homes, waiting to die. 4 billion people were infected in the first wave, Vance continued. The projections said that within 18 months, the human species would be extinct. The Vexari broadcast our suffering across the galaxy. They wanted everyone to see what happened to species that defied the Dominion. They wanted everyone to learn from our example. The hologram showed the Vexari celebration. High Sovereign Vrexelon sat on his golden throne, surrounded by his generals and advisors. They raised cups of some alien drink and congratulated each other on their victory. Their compound eyes gleamed with satisfaction. Several species that had been considering alliances with humanity immediately withdrew their support. They did not want to share our fate. The galaxy decided that we were finished. They began to speak of humans in the past tense, as if we were already gone. Kethra understood this reaction. Self-preservation was a powerful instinct. No species would risk extinction for the sake of another. But the Vexari made a critical error, Vance said. In their arrogance, they assumed that despair would paralyze us. They assumed we would spend our final months weeping and waiting for death. They did not understand humanity at all. The hologram shifted to show a different scene. A research vessel called the Prometheus, floating in deep space far from any star system. It was small compared to the great warships of the human fleet. But what happened inside that ship would change everything. Dr. Amara Okonkwo was a xenobiologist, Vance said. For 2 years, she had been studying captured Vexari specimens. She wanted to understand their biology, their weaknesses, their secrets. When the extinction strain was released, she was given a new mission: find a way to save humanity. The hologram showed Dr. Okonkwo in her laboratory. She was a small woman with dark skin and tired eyes. Around her were tanks containing vexillary tissue samples, computer screens displaying genetic data and equipment that Kethra did not recognize. She worked without sleep, driven by a desperation that pushed her beyond normal human limits. For 3 months, she searched for a cure. She tested thousands of compounds. She tried hundreds of approaches. Nothing worked. The extinction strain was too perfectly designed. It could not be stopped. Vance paused. A strange expression crossed his ancient face. But in her search for a cure, Dr. Okonkwo discovered something else. Something the Vexari had hidden for millions of years. Something that would prove to be their greatest weakness. The hologram displayed complex biological diagrams. Kethra could not understand the details, but she could see that they showed Vexari cellular structures. The Vexari had a shared immunity system, Vance explained. Unlike most species, their bodies did not fight diseases individually. Instead, they were connected through a biological network. When one Vexari encountered a new pathogen, its immune response was shared with others through chemical signals in their breath and body fluids. This made them incredibly resistant to most diseases. A sickness that killed one Vexari would be quickly identified, and the entire species would develop protection. Kethra nodded slowly. This was an impressive evolutionary adaptation. It explained how the Vexari had survived for so long. But this strength was also a weakness, Vance said. If a pathogen could bypass the shared immunity network, it would spread through the entire species at incredible speed. The same system that protected them could also destroy them. The hologram showed Dr. Okonkwo staring at her screens. Her eyes were wide. Her hands were shaking. She had found the answer she was looking for. But it was not a cure. It was a weapon. Within 6 months, Dr. Okonkwo and her team had created Nemesis 7. It was a biological agent specifically designed to exploit the Vexari immunity network. Once introduced to a population, it would spread from one individual to another through their shared biological systems. There was no cure. There was no treatment. There was only death. Kethra felt cold spreading through her body. She understood now where this story was going. Nemesis 7 was not designed to kill slowly like the extinction strain, Vance continued. It was designed to kill completely. A single infected Vexari could spread the agent to thousands of others within hours. Those thousands would spread it to millions. Those millions would spread it to billions. The entire process, from first infection to total species extinction, would take less than 2 months. The hologram showed Dr. Okonkwo presenting her findings to Admiral Tanaka. The 2 women stood in a secure room, surrounded by the highest-ranking officers in the human military. Dr. Okonkwo looked exhausted. Admiral Tanaka looked determined. Admiral Tanaka took the information to the United Earth Council, Vance said. She presented them with a choice. They could use Nemesis 7 to destroy the Vexari completely, or they could refuse to use it and accept extinction. The hologram showed the council chamber. Hundreds of representatives from every human nation sat in tiered rows. Their faces showed the weight of the decision before them. Some looked angry. Some looked sad. Some looked sick with horror at what they were being asked to consider. The debate lasted 3 days, Vance said. Some argued that using Nemesis 7 would make humanity no better than the Vexari. They said that genocide was wrong, no matter the circumstances. They said that humanity would lose its soul if it chose this path. They argued that we should find another way, even if it meant our own extinction. The hologram showed these speakers. Men and women stood before the council, tears streaming down their faces, begging their fellow humans to choose mercy. They pointed to the billions of humans dying from the extinction strain. They pointed to the colonies that had been burned. They pointed to the children who had been taken and turned into weapons against their own families. They said that the Vexari had started this war. They said that the Vexari had chosen extinction as a weapon. They said that humanity had every right to respond in kind. The hologram showed these speakers too. Soldiers who had fought on the front lines, survivors of destroyed colonies, Parents who had lost their children to Vexari atrocities, their voices shook with rage and grief. In the end, the council voted. Vance looked at Kethra. His ancient eyes held no judgment, no pride, no shame, only memory. The vote was unanimous. Every single representative voted yes. Not because they wanted to commit genocide, not because they enjoyed the thought of killing trillions. They voted yes because they believed they had no other choice. The Vexari had tried to erase humanity. Humanity would erase them first. The hologram showed Admiral Tanaka receiving the council's decision. She read the document once, then set it aside. Her face was stone. Whatever she felt inside, she did not show it. Within 1 week, the human fleet was ready. Ships carrying Nemesis 7 were dispatched to every known Vexari star system. 400 targets. Trillions of lives. The largest coordinated military operation in human history. The hologram showed the fleet departing Earth orbit. Thousands of ships, their engines burning bright against the darkness of space. They moved in perfect formation, each one carrying death in its cargo hold. Before the fleet left, Admiral Tanaka recorded a message. It was broadcast across the galaxy on all frequencies. Every species heard it. The Vexari heard it. And the words she spoke are still remembered today, 800 years later, as the Admiral's face appeared in the hologram. Her voice filled the vault, clear and cold and terrible. To the Dominion. You sought to erase us. You called us weak. You called us prey. You were wrong. To the galaxy, let this be remembered. Humanity did not start this war, but we will finish it. And when we are done, the Vexari will be nothing but a cautionary tale whispered in the dark. The hologram faded to black. The fleet jumped to faster-than-light speed, Vance said quietly. 400 task forces, each one targeting a different Vexari world. The largest act of destruction ever attempted by any species in galactic history. He looked at the charred piece of metal on the pedestal, the only remaining proof that the Vexari Dominion had ever existed. What happened next took 47 days. And when it was over, the Vexari were gone. Not defeated. Not conquered. Gone. Erased from existence as completely as if they had never been born. Kethra could not speak. She could barely breathe. Her people had thought they understood war. They had thought they understood what species were capable of doing to each other. They had understood nothing. Would you like to know what happened during those 47 days? Vance asked. Kethra did not want to know. Every part of her screamed to leave this place, to return to her ship, to fly away and never think about humans again. But she had come here for the truth, and she would not leave without it, as she whispered. Tell me everything. Vance nodded slowly. Then let me tell you about the end of the Vexari Dominion. Let me tell you about total erasure. The hologram came to life one final time. Ambassador Kethra watched with eyes that had seen too much already, but she did not look away. She had promised herself that she would learn the truth, no matter how terrible it was. Archivist Vance stood beside her, his ancient voice carrying the weight of 8 centuries of memory. The campaign lasted 47 days, he began. 47 days to erase an empire that had stood for 10,000 years. 47 days to kill more beings than any war in galactic history. 47 days to teach the universe a lesson it would never forget. The hologram showed human ships arriving at Vexari worlds. They did not come with warnings. They did not come with demands. They simply appeared in orbit and began their work. Small pods were launched toward the planets below. Each pod contained enough Nemesis 7 to infect an entire continent. The Vexari did not understand what was happening at first, Vance said. They saw human ships and prepared for battle. They expected weapons fire, boarding parties, the normal actions of war. Instead, they watched tiny pods fall through their atmosphere like seeds. By the time they realized what those seeds contained, it was already too late. The hologram showed the spread of Nemesis 7. It moved through Vexari populations like wind through grass. One infected individual would breathe near another. That one would touch a third. Within hours, entire cities were contaminated. Within days, entire continents. The shared immunity network, that had protected the Vexari for millions of years, now carried their destruction from body to body with terrible speed. The symptoms appeared within 12 hours of infection. Vance continued. First came weakness, then came paralysis. Then the exoskeleton began to crack and crumble. Death followed within 36 hours. There was no cure. There was no treatment. There was no hope. Kethra watched images of Vexari cities falling silent. Streets that had been filled with activity became empty. Buildings that had housed thousands became tombs. The proud warriors who had conquered 19 species lay dying in their homes, unable to move, unable to fight, unable to do anything but wait for the end. But humanity did not simply release the weapon and leave, Vance said. We stayed to watch. We recorded everything. We wanted the galaxy to see what happened to species that tried to destroy us. We wanted everyone to understand that there was no mercy in our hearts. Not anymore. The hologram shifted to show the subjugated species rising up across Dominion space. The message humanity had sent months earlier was being answered. Slaves who had served the Vexari for centuries were now taking their revenge. They seized weapons from dying soldiers. They captured ships from abandoned stations. They turned on their masters with all the rage of generations of oppression. The 19 species the Dominion had enslaved did not wait for humanity to free them, Vance said. They freed themselves. They killed every Vexari they could find, whether the Nemesis 7 had reached them yet or not. Centuries of hatred poured out in a wave of violence that swept across the Empire. The Vexari died from our weapon. They died from the hands of their former slaves. They died in every way that beings can die. The hologram showed High Sovereign Vrexolan receiving reports in his throne room. His advisors were panicking. His generals were screaming about collapse on every front. The compound eyes that had once gleamed with confidence now showed nothing but terror. His empire was dying around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The High Sovereign tried to negotiate, Vance said. He sent messages to Admiral Tanaka begging for talks. He offered to surrender. He offered to give humanity anything we wanted. He offered to become our servant, to bow before us, to worship us as gods. He would have said anything, promised anything, to survive. The hologram displayed the messages. Desperate words from a desperate creature. Please, that grew more and more frantic as the days passed and no response came. Admiral Tanaka never replied. Not once. She had nothing to say to him. There was nothing he could offer that would bring back the billions of humans who had died. There was nothing he could do that would undo the horrors his people had committed. The time for talking had passed. Now there was only the ending. The hologram showed Vrexolan fleeing his throne world as Nemesis 7 reached the capital. He boarded his personal ship, the fastest vessel in the Dominion fleet, and ran. He abandoned his people. He abandoned his empire. He thought only of saving himself. We tracked him for 17 days, Vance said. He fled across the galaxy, jumping from system to system, trying to escape. He did not know that human hunter-killer squadrons had been assigned specifically to find him. He did not know that we had captured his communication codes months earlier. Every message he sent, every course he plotted, we knew about it before he even finished giving the orders. The hologram showed the chase. Human ships pursuing the High Sovereign through empty space. Closing the distance slowly, patiently, inevitably. There was no hurry. There was nowhere for him to go. We caught him above a dying brown dwarf star at the edge of the galaxy, Vance said. His ship was surrounded. His escorts had already been destroyed. He was alone, the last of his kind still holding any power, facing the species he had tried to exterminate. The hologram showed Admiral Tanaka's flagship moving into position. Its weapons were armed and ready. On the bridge, the Admiral stood watching the view screen where the High Sovereign's ship hung helpless in space. He sent one final message, Vance said. A plea for mercy. He said that he surrendered. He said that he would submit. He said that he would serve humanity forever. He begged us to let his species survive, even if only a few of them, even if they lived as slaves. The hologram displayed Vrexel in his face as he spoke. The mighty ruler of 400 star systems was weeping. Dark fluid leaked from his compound eyes and dripped down his cracked exoskeleton. He looked nothing like the proud conqueror who had ordered the destruction of human colonies. He looked like what he truly was. A broken creature facing the consequences of his actions. Admiral Tanaka finally responded, Vance said. She spoke the last words any Vexari would ever hear. The Admiral's voice filled the vault, cold and final. You taught us a lesson, Sovereign. Actions have consequences. Now learn yours. The hologram showed the flagship's weapons firing. Bright lances of energy struck the High Sovereign's ship. The vessel broke apart in a flash of light and fire. Rexolin and everyone aboard died instantly. The war was over, Vance said quietly. But humanity was not finished. The hologram showed human ships continuing their work for months after the last Vexari world fell silent. They searched every corner of the former Dominion. They checked every station, every outpost, every ship. They hunted for survivors. We found them, Vance said. Small groups hiding in remote locations. Individuals who had somehow escaped the plague. We tracked them down one by one over the next 30 years. We gave them no trials. We offered them no mercy. We simply ended them. Kethra finally spoke. Her voice was barely a whisper. You killed them all. Even those who had done nothing wrong. Even children. Vance turned to look at her. His ancient eyes held no apology. Yes, we killed every last one of them. We erased their cities. We destroyed their monuments. We burned their records. We hunted down every piece of their history and locked it away where no one would ever find it. We wanted the universe to forget they had ever existed. We wanted their name to become nothing but a warning. He gestured at the charred piece of metal on the pedestal. This fragment is one of the only proofs that the Vexari Dominion was ever real. A piece of the High Sovereign's throne recovered from the wreckage of his ship. We keep it here not as a trophy. We keep it as a reminder. A reminder of what? Kethra asked. A reminder of what we became. A reminder of what we are capable of when we are pushed too far. A reminder that the same species that creates art and music and love can also create destruction beyond imagination. Vance led her out of the vault. The heavy door sealed behind them with a sound like a tomb closing. They walked in silence through the corridors of the remembrance. Past the memorials and the artifacts and the records of 1,000 years of human history, when they reached the airlock where Kethra's transport was docked, Vance stopped. Your government is considering joining a coalition against us, he said. I would advise them to reconsider. Not because we want war, do not. The weight of what we did to the Vexari has haunted us for 800 years. We carry that burden every day, but we will do it again if we must. We will do it to anyone who threatens our survival. Kethra looked at him. Has anyone threatened you since? Vance smiled. It was not a warm smile. In 800 years, the Vexari are still the last species that tried. Others have considered it. They have formed coalitions. They have made plans. And then they have learned about what happened to the Dominion, and they have quietly changed their minds. He extended his hand in the human gesture of farewell. Go home, Ambassador. Tell your people what you have learned. Tell them that humanity does not want enemies. We want friends. We want peace. We want to explore the universe and discover its wonders alongside other species. But tell them also that we remember. We always remember, and we are always ready. Kethra took his hand. It was warm and soft and surprisingly gentle for a creature whose species had committed such terrible acts. I will tell them, she said. She boarded her transport and departed. The journey home took 3 years. 3 years of traveling through the darkness, carrying a truth that weighed more than any physical burden. When she finally stood before the Sithani government, they asked her for her report. They asked her what she had learned about humanity. They asked her whether they should join the coalition. Her report was 3 words long. Do not engage. The Sithani withdrew from the coalition that same day. The coalition itself dissolved within a year. No one wanted to be the next species to test humanity's resolve, and somewhere in the darkness at the edge of known space, the remembrance continued its endless voyage. Inside its vaults, the story of the Vexari waited in silence. A warning written in the ashes of 1,000,000,000 lives, a lesson paid for in blood and fire and extinction. Some species are conquered. Some species are subjugated. Some species are forgotten by time. The Vexari were erased, and humanity made certain that the universe would never forget why.